Okay, grade 8s, we're going to finish off integers now. We're going to do subtracting integers. And I honestly hope that when you see this, you're like, ugh, I don't want to subtract integers. We've already done multiplying, dividing, and adding. I don't want to subtract integers. I really, honestly hope you feel that way. You know why? Because my one word of advice for you when it comes to subtracting integers is don't. Just don't do it. It just gets too complicated and confusing and everything. So you know what you're going to do whenever you see a subtraction question? You're going to add the opposite. Now there are other ways to subtract integers, and maybe you don't need to add the opposite. But in my opinion is by far the best way to subtract integers, so it's the only method I'm going to show you. You don't have to do it this way, but I strongly, strongly recommend it. So here's the idea with adding the opposite. First of all, you're not going to do anything to the first number, right? So in this first question that we have here, this -4 take away -7, I do nothing to the first number. This -4, do nothing. Okay, well that's easy. I can do nothing. Okay, step 2 isn't much harder. Step 2 is change the subtract sign to an add sign. Okay, maybe I'll do it this way. The first number, I did nothing. So there it still is. The subtract sign, which of course is right here, I'm going to change into a plus sign, an addition sign. Okay, awesome. And the only way you can do that though, the only way you can make a new question that isn't a subtraction question, but is an addition question, is to change the second number to its opposite. So we're going to take -7 and turn it into the opposite of -7. You know what the opposite of -7 is? It's +7. Look, we now have an addition question. You've already shown me that you're good at addition questions. We did them in the last video, and you were successful with it, I hope. So let's take a look. You're going to use whichever method you want. I'm going to stick with this method. What do you have more of? Negatives, you have 4 of them, or positives, you have 7 of them. You have more positives, don't you? So the answer is going to be positive. And how many more is 7 than 4? It's 3 more. So there's your answer. Okay, they're all going to be the same. We're going to add the opposite. So remember, you don't do anything to the first number. The first number stays exactly the same, -5. We don't want to subtract, we want to add, but you can only do that if you change the +9 to its opposite, which is -9. Okay, what do you have more of, positives or negatives? Well, they're all negative, so it's definitely going to be negative. Now remember, you have 5 negatives, and you have another 9 negatives. So how many more negatives do you have than positive? Well, you got to count them all up. There's no positives to counteract those. So you've got 14 negatives there. 14 more negatives than positives. Okay, there's really not much else to do. We'll just do a few more examples. We do not want to subtract. It's too hard. So we're going to keep the number the same, the first number. We're going to add the opposite. Opposite of 15, -15. Okay, what do you have more of, positives or negatives? Definitely negatives. How much more is 15 than 5? 10. Finished. Another one? Okay, keep the first number the same, +4. I don't want to subtract, I want to add. I can only do that if I change the sign of the second one, so it should become +8. Hey, look at that. I end up with 4 plus 8. Well, that's 12. Okay, this one looks a little different. It's exactly the same. You just have to be careful. In order to make this clear what's going on here, I'm going to write this again with the brackets. That's what's different, right? The questions up here, you have all the brackets, nice brackets to hold everything in place. Here you don't have them. But if you want, you can still put them in. -4 would be in the first bracket. Then you have this minus. Then what would be in your second bracket? What kind of 7 is it? Is this a +7 or a -7? That's a +7, right? This here is the takeaway sign. And then this 7 here is all by itself with no sign at all, so that means it's a +7. Alright, once you've distinguished that, you probably don't need to write what I've written so far, but once you at least have figured that out, you know you keep the first number the same, you change the subtract sign to an addition sign, and that 7, or that +7 if you like, changes into a -7. Not sure why I didn't put this in brackets. Alright, what do you have more of, positives or negatives? Well, they're all negative. You have 4 negatives and 7 more negatives. So 4 and 7, I don't even know if that's 7, I was just putting a bunch of dots. 4 and 7 means you have 11 more negatives than positives. There's no positives to wipe out some of these negatives. All right, one more here. I'll try doing this one without rewriting it in brackets. I would keep the first number the same, which is 3. I don't want to subtract, I want to add. And the opposite of 10. This is just 10 here, right? This takeaway we already changed to an addition. This is 10 or positive 10, so it's going to become negative 10. Now, what do you have more of? Negatives or positives? If it doesn't have a symbol, it's a positive. You have more negatives. How much more is 10 than 3? 7. So you're good. Getting a little bit repetitive, isn't it? But that's good. At least we're understanding, hopefully. All right, keep the first number the same. Even if it's 0, doesn't matter. We don't want to subtract. We want to add. And we have to add the opposite of negative 6, which is positive 6. 0 plus 6 is 6. Keep the first number the same. We don't want to subtract. We want to add. The opposite of negative 11 is positive 11. What do you have more of, negatives or positives? Whoa, wait a minute. We have the same amount. What's going on here? Well, if you have 11 of the negatives and 11 of the positives, they're just going to cancel each other out, right? All 11 are just going to cancel, 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 cancel. So you have nothing left. You have 0. Okay, let's do a very, very quick review. So, what happens when we multiply? When you multiply, you just have to remember that 2 negatives make a positive. And then just multiply normally. 8 times 3 is 24. Remember, multiplication and division rules are the same. So if you have 2 negatives and you're multiplying or dividing, it's positive. What if you only have 1 negative, like in this one? Then the answer is negative. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Okay, here's an addition question. Now, don't do this. People start doing this sometimes and, oh, it's awful. They say, okay, I keep the first number the same. Oh, it's already plus, that's good. And then I do the opposite. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is this was not a subtraction question. So don't change anything. If it's an addition question, just go ahead and answer the question. Don't be changing anything. So what do you have more of here, negatives or positives? Well, I have 4 negatives and 6 more negatives. They're all negative. So my answer is going to be negative. How many total negatives are there? There's 10 negatives. Okay, now this one is subtraction. That's what we just learned today. We don't want to subtract. Don't do it. Keep the first one the same. Change the subtraction to an addition. Opposite of plus 3 is negative 3. What do you have more of, positives or negatives? They're all negatives. How many negatives? 9 total. All right, and then we get to, once we've learned all the operations, as you now have, you can also do some BEDMAS, order of operations. I don't want to really do too much of this. I don't want to confuse anyone, but I'll just do 2 examples. This question here, we have an addition step up here, and then we're going to divide right there. So let's get our addition first. We have negative 4 plus negative 2. So we're adding, we're happy. We don't have to change anything because it's addition. So you have 4 negatives and 2 more negatives. What do you have more of, positives or negatives? Well, you only have negatives, so negative. How many negatives do you have? 4 and 2 is 6. And we're dividing that by negative 2. A negative divided by negative is a positive. 2 negatives make a positive only when you multiply and divide, not when you add and subtract. But when you multiply and divide, 2 negatives make a positive. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay, this one, what do we have here? Well, we have a subtraction step in the bracket, and then this negative 5 just sitting out front. What's that going to do? It's going to multiply that. Now remember, with BEDMAS, if you remember BEDMAS, we'll talk about it more in class, but you do your brackets first. So the first thing you want to actually do is 3 take away 6. Uh-oh, subtraction. We do not want to subtract. What we want to do instead is add the opposite. So keep the first one the same, change it to plus, and the opposite of 6, or positive 6, is negative 6. So what do you have more of, positives or negatives? You have more negatives. And how much more is 6 and 3? 3. But remember, that was in brackets. I'm going to keep it in brackets. And I still have up front this negative 5. I haven't done anything with that yet. Now, what does this mean? Negative 5 and then bracket negative 3? That means negative 5 times negative 3. So we have a negative times a negative, which makes it positive. And 5 times 3 is 15. Alright, if these last 2 questions down here caused you any grief, don't worry about it, honestly. But I'm hoping that these questions above it were okay, especially these 4 we did here that reviewed the 4 operations. Thanks so much, and have a good day. Bye.